No!
How about this? The U.S. Park Police are...
Let's start by storming Blackgate!
What's going on, everyone? So not too long ago, I did my top 10 favorite comedies of all time. So this time around, I figured I would give you guys my top 10 animated films of all time. And of course, it's my opinion. So I'll be going from 10 to 1, with obviously 1 being my favorite of all time. This is obviously a subjective list. My list is going to be different from yours, but nonetheless, I'll still be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on my list as well as what your list is down below. But enough exposition. Let's get into it, guys. Kicking things off with number 10, which is The Incredibles. The Incredibles was one of the first PG movies I saw at such a young age, and I liked it then and I like it now. In preparation for The Incredibles 2, I watched it again, and I like this movie. I think it's really well done. It's the best rendition of Fantastic Four to date. It's really good. It's like Fantastic Four meets Watchmen. I like it. I like it a lot. I think it's definitely one of the strongest Pixar films, and yeah, would highly recommend it. That's why it's my number 10. My number 9 is Paddington 2. I know what you guys are thinking. Paddington 2, I thought that was like live action. It is, but I did look this film up, and it's considered animated as well. It's considered live action animation. So I'm like, you know what? Gives me a good excuse to put this on my list. I love this movie. I really, really dig this movie. I like the first one too, but I like the second one more. And I think the second one I like more is because this felt like an animated version of The Grand Budapest Hotel, which, if you saw my other list, you know is my favorite comedy. So why wouldn't I like it in bear form? I grew up watching the animated show Paddington at such a young age. So, you know, getting to see a live action animated version of it, I thought it was very intriguing, to say the least. And it honestly not only pays homage in such a good way, it honestly makes it its own. And I think that's important. And it does so in such an intriguing way. Would highly recommend you check out Paddington 2. Obviously, watch the first one. But if you haven't seen the first one, you can still watch the second one, no problem. And yeah, that's why it's my number 9. Love it. Next up, my number 8 is Finding Nemo, which I really dig this movie. Thomas Newman does such a great job with the score. The animation is beautiful. The story, for its time, was very unique and intriguing at the same time. Obviously now, this is a formula that Disney and Pixar both have obviously tried to imitate. But if you ask me, I don't think it's ever fully perfected that. And I think that a lot of it has to do with everything feels natural. There's nothing really about this film that feels like it doesn't fit. And that's the great thing about this movie. It's about 100 minutes long, and it goes by really fast. The ending is very fitting. I don't think the sequel is needed. The sequel is fine, I guess. But this original one, my goodness, it's really good. It holds up very well. And that's why it's my number 8. Next up, my number 7 is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Look, I can't lie. I was not excited for this movie when it came out in theaters. I really wasn't. But a couple minutes in, I knew I was going to love this film. And the reason why I say this is because right away I was able to see this is a film that an artist created. And I know that sounds pretentious, but bear with me on this, right? So it's someone that had a vision. The studio was able to back it up, and then here we go. We see everything about this film in full sight. Everything about this film feels fresh. It feels invigorating. This is a story that shouldn't work, but it does. Because, I mean, Spider-Man, let's be honest. Since the comic book genre has become so huge, and the superhero genre have become so huge, Spider-Man's been a big part about that. I mean, he's been rebooted so many times. So, obviously, when you hear about another Spider-Man movie and it being animated, you're like, oh, gosh, come on, you gotta be kidding me. But this movie works so well because it has a different kind of angle about it. And truth be told, it's got great voice acting, great score, great cinematography, great sound mixing, rewatchability value as well. It's so great. And there's so many different styles to the animation too that really are effective. Definitely one of the better films of 2018, as well as one of my favorite animated films. So yeah, that's why it's my number 7. Next up, my number 6 is Toy Story 4. Was this movie necessary? I went into it thinking it wasn't. I came out of it saying, yeah, that was necessary. I love Toy Story 4, man. It made me very emotional when I saw it in theaters. Both times I saw it, and even when I saw it finally on 4K at home. It's just such a great film. It really is. I don't think they should make a 5th one, but if they do, and it has the same mentality level of like the 4th one, how it enhances the series, by all means, I'm for it. This movie definitely enhanced the series. It filled in gaps of the third one that I didn't even know should have been, gaps, but it does it in such an intriguing way. And it's honestly great closure for the character of Woody. I love this film. Would highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. Although, based on the box office, I'm sure you already have seen it. So yeah, that's why it's my number 6. Next up, my number 5. I don't own it yet on Blu-ray. I've been holding off on it just because it's so expensive. But my number 5, I watched recently, and yes, it's a great film, and that's why it's my number 5. My number 5 is Mary and Max, which is definitely one of the more adult entries on this list. Don't get me wrong, all these movies, in my opinion, are obviously something that anyone can watch, adults, kids. Obviously, a lot of these are more adult-oriented because, think about it, I'm an adult and I'm watching these and I love them. But anyways, my number 5 is the more adult one because I think this one would be PG-13 or R, truth be told. I mean, it's dealing with a lot of topics such as like suicide, depression, anxiety. Like these are very serious issues, and it doesn't like tiptoe around it. It just bluntly puts it in front of you. Loneliness. It's like these are topics that, I remember when I saw it as like a late teenager, seeing this movie, I was like, wow, like this is so emotional. And watching it recently, I'm just kind of like, this is great, man. It really is. It's so effective. I can't wait to watch it, many, many more times over. It's so good though. Would highly recommend it. It's claymation, and I love claymation, so obviously it was right on my alley. But claymation, it's so good. It really is one of the best entries of claymation, no doubt about it. But yeah, it's my number 5. Next up, my number 4, speaking of claymation. Number 4, we have Isle of Dogs. Love this film. This and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse were great entries of 2018 animated films. This was such a great film. I loved it. Either or with, best animated feature for that year. I could have gone either or Isle of Dogs or Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse because I love them both. I think what's great about this movie is that it was so timely when it came out, and even still it's timely. And that's why I'm thinking that this will age like a fine wine. Definitely one of the better animated films to come out this decade, and as you can tell, one of my favorite of all time. So yeah, that's my number 4. Next up, my number 3 is Rango. Oh man, I love Rango. So Rango was a film I'll never forget. I saw in April of 2011. I saw it in April 2011, and I remember seeing it and not liking it. My friend and I both didn't like it. We just didn't laugh. We didn't find it funny. And I still wanted to buy it on DVD, though, when it finally came out on DVD. I'll never forget I got it for Christmas that year. And I watched it, but I didn't like it. And then I remember selling it off a couple years later. But I then watched a lot more movies. And then during the pandemic, I watched it again, and I was like, what were you thinking, Chad? This is a great film. And I think a lot of it comes down to this movie is filled to the brim with film references like no other film I think I've seen. It references Chinatown, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, Once Upon a Time in America. The list goes on, honestly. And then obviously all of these are like some of my favorite of all time. So seeing a film, Apocalypse Now, stuff like this in a kid-oriented film. Again, anime films obviously aren't necessarily for kids, but you go into this movie thinking it's for kids, and you end up watching a movie that's very, very adult-oriented. In the best of ways, honestly. There's a lot to appreciate this film. The animation is gorgeous. The acting across the board is great. I love Johnny Depp in the lead role. He gives a performance that obviously is harkening back to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas that he also played. The humor, again, it works so well with me. And it's not even just film references. There's also just so many hilarious scenes that aren't film related. But I also love the homage to other Westerns. And when I say that, I mean that it pays homage to other Westerns, but at the same time holds out on its own. Like, you could not necessarily have seen any other Western, and you could just watch it straight up and be able to just smile ear to ear with how it does such a great job of the genre. Honestly, it's one of my favorite Westerns, too. I think it's a great film. That's why I bought it on Blu-ray, and I'm looking forward to watching it many times over. I might review this movie. I'm considering it just because it turns 10 this year, so it gives me a pretty good excuse to decide to say, hey, let's review this movie, but don't know just yet. But that's why it's my number 3. Next up, number 2 is Toy Story 3. Man, I love this film. This movie, I've seen so many times. It gets better and better, honestly, each time. And that ending, it's so emotional. It's so good. Like, look, this is my favorite Toy Story film and probably my favorite Pixar film. It's just, Everything about it works. And I'll leave it at that. It's so good. That's my number 2. Next up, my number 1. Many of you probably already guessed this, but my number 1 is my favorite anime film, Fantastic Mr. Fox. Oh, this movie's so great. It really is. I'll never forget, I got this movie out from the library because I heard about it vaguely, but I got it out from the library, and I remember my mom watched it, and she said it wasn't good. So I was like, oh, okay, I won't watch it. But then several months, passed, and I decided to get it out from the library, and I watched it, and as soon as I watched it, I was like, this movie rules. I've never given this film under a 5 out of 5 star rating because I, to this day, still have yet to been able to find a flaw that I find a flaw, obviously, because it's just a movie that it goes by so fast. It has deep messages. It's got great voice acting. It's got great cinematography. I love the claymation. It's just so good. Rewatchability value is off the charts. It does everything to the best of its ability, and it works so well. And you know what? I mean, 12 years later, this movie still has aged so good. I love this movie. It's a masterpiece in my eyes, and that's why it is my number 1. Now, I did also forget to mention that there are some honorable mentions that I wanted to give, which is like Missing Link, Ratatouille. There's a bunch of anime films. Ghost in the Shell. There's so many different types of animation, and I know it's one of those things where people might think I don't like animated films. It's not. These are all films that I can watch any time of the day because I really like them. It's an interesting genre for sure, and I'm glad to see that it's become, very, very much so embedded in pop culture. Though, who knows? Maybe if you don't watch a lot of animated films, maybe this list gave you some films that you might not have heard of or have seen yet and can now put them on your list. But anyways, guys, what's your top 10 animated films of all time list? Let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, don't forget the subscription, notification bell.